Apologies, I'm going to read, otherwise I might run over considerably. I'm just going to pop that up there for a second. Thank you, Seppi. Paul Theroux said that cartography was the most scientific of the arts and the most artistic of the sciences, and I'm optimistic that the majority of you here will agree with that. My interest in maps began with a fascination for the craft of map making, but also that sense of adventure, that human desire to explore, to voyage, to travel and discover, which is the essence that maps both depict and enable. More recently, my work's focused on how maps influence how we see the world and our place in it. When pocket maps were first made in the 1600s, it took 2 years to circumnavigate the globe. These miniature worlds, used to share the stories of travel, trades, investments and exploits, reflect the early modern thirst for geographical knowledge. Now the International Space Station orbits the Earth every 90 minutes, and we have a digital world in our mobile phones, and our access to geography is instantaneous. For me, there's something about the physicality of a folded OS 1 to 25,000 map in the hand. Maybe it's a generational thing, but I love the smell of the paper, the folds and the creases of use, the waxy traces of finger marks, exploring the map, exploring the landscape. I wanted to make a globe that has a tangible connection to Earth and to enable a tangible connection to each other. These are intended as face-to-face conversation starters. Whether they're personal or global conversations, it's up to you. They're about how we see the world and how we choose to interact with it and how we choose to interact with each other. These porcelain globes are made of the stuff of the ground, the clay from its surface. They're tiny, but I wanted them to have some gravitas and have some weight and to have the kind of the familiarity of a pebble that you might scoop up on a beach. They're more robust than you think, so I'm actually going to pass this around. Don't worry if you drop it, they bounce on carpet, not so much on concrete. Wood, I'm not so sure, it hasn't happened yet, but if it happens, it happens. The scale is 1 to 170 million. They're painted with metal oxides, the colour is fused into the clay, so the colour's not on the surface, it goes into the surface. The graticule is painted with cobalt oxide, which is the stuff that's in your mobile phones, in your electric car batteries. It's how we connect. The green areas contain copper, and the yellows and browns are various types of iron-rich earth. The same materials that bring water into your home and hold up your knock-through extension. They're present in this microcosm. I'm just going to nip back to slide 1. I currently have an exhibition at the Royal Geographical Society, which runs to the 10th of October. If you're a member or a fellow, you can go in Monday to Friday if you're interested in going to see it. If you're not a member or a fellow and you'd like to see the exhibition, come and see me afterwards. I'm going to try and organise a day's visit sometime before the 10th of October. In this exhibition, I've made some new limited edition pocket globes with ancient bog oak bases. It's a collaborative project with craftsman Adrian Swinstead. He's an artist who works primarily with bog oak. And some more examples to pass around. I hope I'm not going to run over here. They don't have to go together. Because I'm talking about tangible, tactile objects, it just felt obvious to kind of bring things for you to actually handle. I'm inspired by the Petworth globe, but I was frustrated that you can't get near it. When I met Adrian in an exhibition last year, I was struck by the resonance of this ancient timber and his sensitive response to it. With each piece of his work, he's influenced by the form and the history of the timber he's using, respecting the natural beauty of its form. These pieces of ancient bog oak, which were found in Conington Fen in Cambridgeshire, were dated by the Bristol Dendrochronology Unit, and by georeferencing the location, they've estimated this oak to be around 5,000 years old. For this collaboration, I gave him 2 globes and a very loose idea, and he responded by pairing these small porcelain spheres with several unique pieces of ancient timber. In response to the pieces that he made, be it the unique grain patterns or the inlaid sycamore lines, and the one that's this poster child here for the RGS, that's brilliant, that's the RGS logo, that's neat. So for each of those, I've developed a new range of pocket globes, adding tiny little bits of detail, and there's a new tectonic plates globe that I've made. The Blue Meridians globe refers to the principal method of mapping of wayfinding and georeferencing. The mapping of series as a whole alludes to hydrogeomorphology and the charting of weather patterns, changes in climate, tidal influences of the moon, and ocean tides that preserve this timber in the peat fens for 5 millennia. Let's skip back to here. We know much of the history of ceramics we know so much of history through the ceramics that have survived thousands of years buried in the ground. Having previously trained as a cartographer, I used to work for Birkbeck, just across the road, I tried to bring a map maker's exactitude to my ceramics, but I wanted to make something that was about now. The relief detail on these pieces are from LiDAR data. So although these were inspired by 16th century pocket globes, these couldn't have been made with this level of accuracy pre-2005. They're very much about how we see the world now. Each globe is individually made. I've realised I've just gone back too far. There we go, sorry. Each globe is individually made. I've combined some traditional ceramic techniques, the same methods that make the domestic plates and mugs, but I use jewellery quality materials for my moulds in order to capture the fine detail, because that detail would be lost by normal ceramic production. However, even with jewellers' materials, this making method only gives me the form, it doesn't give me the detail. The drawing of the coasts and islands, longitude, latitude, takes an additional day. It's done by drawing. And I scribe in the detail with a homemade tool, which has the tool that I'm using on the top right there, which is actually one of my grandmother's sewing needles, and I made an ergonomic handle around it so I could hold it all day long. It's pin-sharp Sheffield steel, 1950s. And I love the fact that this needle made my clothes when I was a kid, but there's also a link to pre-digital map making. When I trained as a cartographer, a very long time ago, map making was still drawn in colour separation. And you'd sometimes have to have up to 20 separate millimetre perfect layers that, when combined in litho printing, created your colour map. Some of these layers were drawn as negatives, traced on a light box with a scribing tool. And I used to love kind of pulling that tool across the surface, and it would get this lovely coil of kind of light blocking film come off, revealing this kind of perfect parallel line underneath. And I like to think in a way I've transposed some of that kind of analogue cartography, map making craft into the way that I work with the clay now. I like to think of this work as souvenirs of time and place. Obviously, you're not going to navigate by them, but they are mementos of place. And I'm delighted to say that they're in private collections internationally and in the permanent collections of the Museum of London and the National Maritime Museum. Working in detail on globes gives me a regular kind of reminder of the oft overlooked regions of the world. The lost detail of the polar regions, for example, on a rectangular world map, and the absence of representation for half of the planet that is the water hemisphere. This led me to wanting to make a world map that was essentially a peeled globe, laid out as globe gauze with an equal area projection for the continents. This is the divided globe triptych, is a 26-piece ceramic relief map. In actual size, the map's about so big. It's based on an original hand-drawn contour map, that's my drawing on the left. And from that, I used, it's pretty much the same method that Dudley Stamp kind of categorised in the book in the 1950s, and making ceramic models. A lot of us would have done that as a kid, sheets of cardboard in paper. But what I'm using here is millimetre thin layers of porcelain, which you can just see in the central image, you can just see that on the edge of the scalpel. And apologies to Kent and East Anglia, because that's on the next gore over. And then from laying out that stepped contour, I then use my mobile phone and I zoom into Google Earth and satellite imagery to try and get a feel for sculpting the landscape. And that's all done by eye. So the contour map is my kind of as closest to precision as I'm going to get with this, which is obviously a long way off than most of the other things we've seen today. But my motivation for making this really was, I kind of call it my 1,000-hour knee-jerk response to the post-truth fake news that sort of permeates contemporary news feeds, with the exception of the FT, of course, and sort of reflects the modern world where regions are sort of separating and boundaries are being erected and communities are increasingly divided. And this map in particular was my response to Brexit, because I just thought, what a ridiculous idea. I just felt that there's, so I'm going off piece slightly now, but I from a personal point of view, I just felt that there are so many people in the world that respond to, that have a worldview based on a rectangular world map that distorts the comparative continent sizes the further you get from the equator, and it really favours the northern hemisphere. And so what I wanted to do was to kind of just make a piece of artwork that people could identify that it was a world map, but where the continents were presented in an equal area projection. And this actually corresponds to the small globes that are being passed around, with each gore kind of represented and peeled flat. Fragmented globe in 24 pieces was a further development of that map. I was frustrated with the other map, so thin and delicate tiles that the gallery that I sailed through wanted it behind glass, and I was going, no, it needs to be handled. So I came up with an alternative that could be handled, which is effectively a peeled globe. So there were 24, it's an installation artwork based on exactly the same moulds that the previous piece was done. But the idea is it can be presented in a number of ways. And the Royal Academy put it on the floor in the summer exhibition as if it had just fallen and shattered in the corner. And I arranged it like this at the London Group exhibition in November last year as two polar hemispheres. And the purpose of making this piece really was I wanted to compel viewers to want to put it back together. And the only way that you could put it back together is you'd need a lot of hands working together to do so. And if anybody would like to help me make a film of this, a performance thing, come and see me afterwards, because it's something that I want to do, and I just think it would be so appropriate to do it with the hands of cartographers, kind of putting this thing back together. I've no idea how it's going to work out completely, but it's a project that I'd like to do. I have an ongoing series called Current Work, which some of you may have recognised this, and thank you, because it got commended last year in the awards. But to say a little piece about it, the series Current Work really explores our essential relationship with the flow of water in the built environment. And this piece, Thames Water, is a stepped contour relief of the Thames water catchment area. And mindful of the environmental harm caused by the underinvestment of the precarious infrastructure, I wanted to make work that explored the physical geography, placing the river network as the primary focus of the densely populated southeastern region. The twist with this piece is the glaze on that contains a product called Our Carbon, which is a carbon negative byproduct of the sewage industry that has been developed by Bioforce Tech in California. And basically they've diverted post-treatment sewage solids from landfill and treated it in a carbon negative way, and it can be used as a concrete aggregate, a soil improver, a textile and wood stain, and in this case as a glaze addition, and it brings this iron-rich metallic fleck to the glaze. The Thames rises near Campbell in Gloucestershire and flows 215 miles through the southeast of England, through London to the sea. Maps of this area are predominantly focused on the built environment of this highly populated area, and at this scale the river is generally invisible. This was conceived in lockdown, and this map of the Thames brings our essential relationship with the river to the fore. It's a series of 5 plates, and I made it for an installation at an exhibition at Oxo Tower on the south bank of the Thames last year. And the map could be viewed simultaneously whilst watching the river roll by outside the gallery, giving a reference to where the body of water had flowed from and where it was flowing to. I work in a very analogue way, in case you haven't already guessed. I left my cartographic job at Birkbeck for an art degree in 1987 when digital cartography was in its infancy, preferring the physicality of rotoring pens and drafting film over mouse and screen. At the time, my father said to me, "What about your pension?" And I went, and I'm now going, yeah, actually, he had a point. Anyway, the data that I wished to include on this piece was the entire River Thames and its tributaries, the catchment boundary, the terrain that dictates the river flow's 50-metre contour lines, the Ordnance Survey 10-kilometre grid for alignment and scale, and the public open recreation spaces. And I started drawing these on an Ordnance Survey 1 to 25k. And I was tracing them, and I spent about 3 or 4 evenings doing it, and I thought, I'm nowhere near Oxford yet. And then I checked my sums, and I'd realised I'd got my decimal point in the wrong place, and actually the drawing was going to be 13 metres long. So at that point, I put a call out to the British Cartographic Society, thank you, and Claire Selden, who is not here today, very kindly collated the required data from the Ordnance Survey data sets, thank you Ordnance Survey, and produced a PDF version of the map for me that I could scale and adapt as a base for the artworks, which is, so the top left there is an example of the way that I draw in preparation for the artworks that I make. The middle is a very grainy screenshot of the map that Claire produced from me, and then my working drawings are the pieces on the right. How am I doing for time? Okay. Thank you all for staying with me so far. So, earlier this year I responded to an open call from Messam's Gallery, who are down in Wiltshire, to an open call to Make for Peace. And I started making a series of plates under a series title called Diagrams for Discourse on Scale and Perspective. And given the notion that many discussions evolve around the dining table, each plate features a map that has a differing view to sort of challenge a debate on world views. I styled them as textbook diagrams with figure references, including the details as detail around the rim. And my one self-imposed criteria was to source all the content via Wikipedia. The earliest known maps that we know about are on clay tablets from Mesopotamia. Information via Wikipedia is widely accessible, infinitely editable, with data both unreliable and changeable. But I wanted to create a snapshot of this shifting digital landscape with views on a number of topics that affect how we see and interact with spatial information. Plate 1, which is just off the screen bottom left, is a snapshot of Renaissance Romanticism. It's a slight nod to early modern exploration and thirst for world knowledge, and it's based on the Water Hemisphere by Professor Bill Rankin, whose radicalcartography.com features a number of alternative ways of presenting world maps. The Water Hemisphere here presents half of the Earth with just 7% of the world's population. Onto this base map I've transcribed by eye the major ocean currents, and within those I've written Da Vinci's text from the Codex Leicester, "By the ancients man has been called the world in miniature," which goes on to make analogies between the lungs rising and falling and breathing and the rise and fall of the oceans with the tides. Plate 2, which is centre, pairs Bill Rankin's land hemisphere with the other 93% of the world population, with text scribed from an extract of the Wikipedia page on peace. Plates 3, 4 and 5, well 3's on there, the others are not there I'm afraid, but 3, 4 and 5 respectively feature a map from a screen grab of John Nelson's base map on the Esri Interactive Map Satellite Explorer, Carl Sagan's Cornell lecture scribed into the sunbeams of the 1 pixel image of Earth taken by Voyager 1, and a composite set of maps from the universe showing the position of Hubble telescope ultra deep field image. The exhibition at the RGS is basically the beginning of a personal research project into the manuscript maps of the Royal Geographical Society. And I'm drawn to the objects that reveal the human hand charting interpretations of place. I'm fascinated by the liminal traces of geographical experience in the overlap between explorer, surveyor, cartographer and viewer. And the drafts and sketches of erasure on these archive objects, often drawn in situ, reveal the edit and thought process of the cartographer and the challenge of conveying entire landscapes condensed into a series of lines and marks. These maps in the archive record a personal experience of place at a particular point in time, and in some ways an evolution in the craft of cartography. Perpetual Ocean is the first piece made in response to viewing some of these archival documents, and this work in particular was inspired by the Tianpao 17th century porcelain map of Japan in their collection. The spiral stylisation of the seas reminded me of the visualisation of the ocean surface currents published by NASA in 2012, and the data for that was gathered by satellite and in situ monitors between 2005 and 2007. And I'm just going to finish up by saying the resulting artwork, I hope, captures my visceral response to repeatedly watching the 20-minute film whilst drawing onto the clay surface, first with a soft pencil and then scribing into the clay as my feel for the major ocean currents emerged. And I'm absolutely thrilled that the RGS have just purchased this piece to add to their collection with the intention of displaying it alongside the Japanese plate in the foil room. And finally, my latest work is a series of small vessels, which I've called back projections. Taking an equator of equal length to the 75mm diameter pocket globe doing the rounds here, each piece starts with a thin slab of porcelain and a tracing of a map projection. The idea is a really basic one, to fold them back into three dimensions and see which one is telling the biggest fib. Any guesses to which one the tall one at the back is? Yeah, got it in one. Which brings me back to the importance of globes in our understanding of accurate spatial relationships. I'm running over, but I met an Apollo astronaut in 2017, and he completely understood my globes, which was pretty amazing, given that a lot of what I do was inspired by the classic blue marble image. And I asked Al what it felt like to look at the Earth from the moon, and he said they rehearsed all of their scientific experiments so often that it was just like clockwork what he was doing and when he should be doing it. But he said he did 75 lunar orbits, and he said every time he came around the back of the moon and saw the Earth rise, he had to just stop what he was doing because it gave him goosebumps. And I said, what was it like? And he said it was the most beautiful thing I would ever seen. He also said, people don't realise how small the Earth is. I could cover it with my thumb. I made these lunar pieces, these lunar maps of the lunar landing sites based on the USGS orthophoto maps before I met Al, and they were on the wall when I met him. And the data on the bottom of the map says that they were made from photographs taken on the Apollo 15 mission. And I had this conversation with Al, and then he just went, do you want me to sign that? And I went, yes, please. And when he stood back from signing it, he'd written on it, I took the picture that made this map. Right. I'm going to wrap it up there because I've run over time. But if anybody's got any questions, if there's time for questions, do ask away. If not, just you can find me on Instagram, or if anybody wants to see the exhibition at the RGS, then just do see me afterwards and we'll try and sort out a date. Thank you.
One quick question. If you get a chance to go to the RGS, really, really worth it. Really worth contemplating the world in which we live in the way that Lorraine's represented it. Somebody? Okay. Lorraine, thank you very much. What's the one over there? Oh, right at the back, sorry.
Wonderful work. Amazing work.
Thank you.
What's your next project?
I've got a few. To my delight, I've recently been made a fellow of the RGS, and I thought that was an honour that was reserved for people who did really serious scientific study. Apparently you can get it from playing with clay. But there's a whole host of archive material that I've been looking at, which is to do with early climate monitoring from the late 1890s to 2000s in the Arctic area. And so I'm kind of looking at, I'm particularly interested in oceanography at the moment, and map projections. So I'm kind of making some pieces that are kind of unfolding globes in sort of forms, but also trying to couple that with pieces that are about kind of climate change, but from using the inspiration of how people were researching 100 years ago. Thank you.
Lovely. We're going to have to wrap it up there, I'm afraid, because we have run out of time. We do have a team in the conference team of people who want to get home tonight, and they've got quite a lot of clearing up to do. But before we finish tonight, I would just like to invite Paul to come up to give us some